Meet Guys, a Dangerous Secret. Meep didn't look like a criminal. To a casual observer, she appeared meek and obedient. But every day for 2 years, Meep Guys broke the law. Today, the world salutes her for having the courage and compassion to do that. In 1939, Meep was living and working in Amsterdam, Netherlands. She worked for a company that sold jam-making products. That fall, World War II broke out. A few months later, Hitler and his Nazi soldiers took over the Netherlands. Meep knew Hitler hated all Jews. Still, it was shocking to see Nazi soldiers begin to round up Jews and ship them off to forced labor camps. Meep was not a Jew, but she hated what was happening. Rage smoldered inside her every time she saw a Nazi uniform. Here we are. By 1942, Meep's own boss was in danger. His name was Otto Frank. Mr. Frank desperately wanted to protect his wife and their two daughters, Margot and Anne. But what could he do? As a Jew, he had no rights. He and his family weren't allowed to leave Amsterdam. They weren't allowed even to ride the local streetcars or own a bicycle. They had to wear big yellow stars on their coats so Nazi soldiers could spot them easily. And any day now, the soldiers would come and take them all away. Meep knew that some Jews tried to avoid capture. Many ran for the coast, hoping to get on a ship bound for England. Others snuck out to the countryside, hiding in abandoned shops or old barns. Meep wondered if the Franks had ever thought of fleeing, but she kept her questions to herself. She was sure Mr. Frank would do what he thought was best. Then, one day, Otto Frank called Meep into his office. "Meep," he said, "I have a secret to confide in you." Meep listened as Otto explained his plan. There were some unfinished rooms in the attic above his office. He wanted to hide his family there. Would Meep be willing to help him? It was a lot to ask. In order to help the Franks, Meep would somehow have to smuggle food into the attic every day. What if someone saw her? Besides, how would she get the food in the first place? Wartime rationing meant that people could buy only enough to feed their own families. If Meep started buying food for 4 extra people, surely someone would notice. The neighbors would become suspicious and report her to the authorities. Furthermore, it was not just 4 people who would be hiding in the attic. Mr. Frank had invited a business partner to come with him, as well as the man's wife and son. So Meep would really need to take care of 7 people. Meep knew all this. She knew that if the Nazis found out, they would probably send her to a labor camp too. Yet, when Otto Frank turned to her, Meep never hesitated. Would she help? Of course, she said quickly. Mr. Frank hoped to prepare the attic rooms before they moved in. He wanted to bring in clothing and arrange the beds, but there wasn't time. In early July, Margot Frank received a notice in the mail telling her she had been assigned to a labor camp. She was supposed to report right away. When Otto Frank heard that, he immediately contacted Meep. Early the next morning, they made their move. Meep brought Margot to the secret attic rooms. The rest of the group followed a short time later. And so began 25 months of hiding. The 2 families in the attic suffered in many ways. Their secret rooms were hot in the summer, cold in the winter. During the day, when the building was filled with office workers, they had to be very quiet. When sickness struck, they simply had to wait it out. There was no way they could get medical attention. Anne's eyes began to bother her, and she suffered bad headaches. Her parents knew she needed glasses, but they couldn't risk sending her out to an eye doctor. Although all 7 people worked together, their nerves grew jagged. At times, tension filled the air. Meep, meanwhile, had problems of her own. Every morning she went to work early. She had to get to the office before the regular workers arrived. Quickly, she slipped up to the attic, where her friends gave her a list of the food they needed. Then, later each day, Meep went shopping. She tried to appear casual when she walked into a store and ordered large quantities of food. After a while, Meep began to trust one particular grocer. He never asked questions, but filled her orders as best he could. Meep believed he understood and approved of what she was doing. But one day, when she entered his shop, the grocer wasn't there. In his place was his terror-stricken wife. "What's the matter?" asked Meep. "My husband's been arrested. They've taken him away. He was hiding Jews, 2 Jews. I don't know what they'll do to him." Meep's heart raced. She felt a wave of fear for this gentle man who had been so good to her. She knew it could just as easily have been she who had been discovered. In addition, she knew now that it would be harder than ever to get food for the people in the attic. Luckily, Meep found another grocer who was willing to sell her extra food. Still, it was getting more and more difficult to find anything decent. The Nazis were diverting food supplies away from Amsterdam to feed their own troops. Sometimes Meep spent hours shopping and still wound up with half-rotten vegetables and spoiled meat. The months dragged by. Meep struggled to keep up the spirits of those in the attic. She brought them news of the war, especially when the news was encouraging. She smuggled in armloads of books for them to read. She brought writing paper so young Anne could keep a diary. She managed to find sweets for the children. Once, Meep and her husband even spent the night in the attic to help relieve their friends' boredom and unhappiness. Meep's life became even more stressful when she and her husband agreed to hide a Jewish boy in their own apartment. Meep also took pity on her dentist, a Jewish man named Fritz Pfeffer. She got the Franks' permission to bring him to the attic to live. By the summer of 1944, Meep had reason to hope that the war would soon end. Hitler's troops were retreating from several European positions. But the war did not end soon enough for the Frank family. Meep had been exceedingly careful. She had done all she could to protect the Franks and the others in the attic. She had tried never to draw attention to herself or her activities. Still, someone figured out what was going on and turned her in. Records show that the Nazis received an anonymous phone call telling them about the Jews in the attic. On August 4th, Nazis raided Meep's office building. They went directly to the secret rooms. The next thing Meep knew, her 8 friends were being marched away by Nazi police. It was the last time she ever saw most of them. Meep was lucky she was not arrested. After the Nazis took away her friends, she hurried to the attic. There, lying on the floor, she spotted Anne's diary. She picked it up and hid it in her desk drawer. It was a dangerous thing to keep, for it showed how deeply involved Meep had been in the conspiracy to save the Franks. But Meep didn't care. She promised herself she would keep the diary safe until Anne returned. Tragically, Anne Frank did not return. She and the others were sent to concentration camps. Although Otto Frank survived the ordeal, none of the others made it out alive. Meep was shattered when she learned the news. After the war, Meep gave Anne's diary to Otto. In time, he decided to publish it. That way, he hoped others could learn how vibrant and kind-hearted his young daughter had been. Many years later, Meep herself wrote a book, which she called Anne Frank Remembered. In it, she wrote, "I am not a hero. I was only willing to do what was asked of me and what seemed necessary at the time." But on this point, the rest of the world disagrees. To people who know the story, Meep Guise is a hero. She is a woman of remarkable courage and conviction. She will always be remembered as a beacon of goodness and light during some of history's darkest days.